Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Ishaan Tharoor, Foreign Affairs columnist, The Washington Post; Kelly Clements, Deputy High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR; and Dara Khosrowshahi, Chief Executive Officer, Uber.
Thank you all, and thank you so much to the Concordia Summit for hosting us in this afternoon's session on the global plight of refugees and what the global community can do to address it. I'm Ishaan Tharoor, Foreign Affairs columnist at The Washington Post, and anchor of today's Worldview, the Post's daily column and newsletter on global politics. The timing of today's panel is tragically timely given the events in recent weeks that we've seen in Afghanistan, and even, yes, on the southern border of the United States with Haitian migrants. But it's also a perennial issue. Over the past decade, more than the global population of forcibly displaced peoples has doubled over the past decade. And I think it's safe to say that the capacity and political will of the international community has failed to follow suit. So joining me today to talk us through the way forward is a tremendous panel, and I'm really delighted to be joined by Kelly Clements, the UN's Deputy High Commissioner for Refugees, and Dara Khosrowshahi, CEO of Uber. And we may have a special guest later on. We'll see. Kelly, if I could start with you. Roughly a month ago, your agency at the UN and you forecasted that in a worst-case scenario, we may see up to 500,000 Afghan refugees leave Afghanistan or attempt to leave Afghanistan by the end of this year. Obviously, the events that unfolded there were dramatic, captured the international community's attention. How do you see the situation right now, and what's front of mind for you tackling this crisis?
Well, thank you, Ishaan, and I'm delighted to be here at Concordia again this year and in person this time, which is terrific. Indeed, the last month has been quite dramatic, but this is not a new emergency in Afghanistan. The situation in the country, as you know, very dynamic, from the overlay of climate and drought, underdevelopment, poverty, conflict, and violence. And this is a country that has been fraught. We've been there now for 40 years. And the countries that surround Afghanistan, principally Pakistan and Iran, have hosted refugees now for those 40 years. There are about 2.2 million registered refugees from Afghanistan in Pakistan and Iran currently. Now, when the events in Afghanistan transpired in the middle of August, I think smart organizations start planning, and planning for the worst. Right now, what we would say is that there is a humanitarian crisis inside Afghanistan. It is not a refugee exodus, but that does not mean that we should not be prepared. We have, as a UN family, and particularly as the UN Refugee Agency, we're in every province in Afghanistan. We've worked in those provinces for decades. We are in 2/3 of districts and continue to work with about 900 partners, mostly local Afghan organizations and the like. And this kind of support, I think, in terms of the ability to be able to support, stabilize Afghanistan, provide humanitarian relief and protection, remains fundamentally critical. I think our biggest concern right now, Ishaan, is the inability for Afghans to be able to support themselves with basic services. The economy is on the verge of collapse. The efforts that need to be undertaken for education, for health, for basic services and the like in the country are very precarious. And this is our greatest concern. So our focus and the spotlight is firmly inside the country to try to see how quickly can we, as a humanitarian community, expand. And actually, we have seen some places more stable than we've seen in many months, if not years. You may know, Ishaan, that the displaced population, just this year, there have been 600,000 people newly displaced. In just the last 4 weeks, we've actually seen 100,000 of those displaced people go home and back to their home communities. This is something that we want to be able to support, and we want to see, obviously, more people be able to go back to their homes to be able to rebuild. In terms of the potential people on the move and the like, I think it's largely going to be driven by whether or not they're able to find those services in communities and what's happening in the communities, in either their host communities or their home communities. Right now, it's been a pretty low level of people that are trying to make their way to those border areas. The flows that we see back and forth across the border are primarily for economic reasons or family reunification or medical visits. Obviously, we stand ready to be able to support the hosts to Pakistan and Iran in terms of being able to support potential new refugees, new asylum seekers, people that can't stay safely inside Afghanistan. We know that there will be. We also, of course, want to maintain or recommend that those borders remain open for those that can't stay safely in Afghanistan. But let's remember, these are two countries in particular, and they're not alone. These are two countries that have hosted refugees for 40 years. Before the dramatic events of the last month, they had half of their needs in the case of Pakistan and only a quarter of their needs in the case of Iran that were actually supported. So in terms of being able to receive and host potential new Afghan refugees, of course, they're looking at this quite skeptically, if I can say that quite directly, because they have felt that the international community has let them down, has not been there when they have needed it, and need much more sustained and increased support. The other way that obviously we can help, and we've seen, of course, those dramatic scenes at the airport. We've seen the evacuations, of course, of those that are connected with those that have left now the country, and the outpouring, obviously, in this country and others in terms of being able to welcome Afghans. But there's also a very strong need to be able to support Afghans who have been for many years in Pakistan and Iran, including, for example, with resettlement, which becomes critically important.
I want to circle back to the broader work of UNHCR during the course of your career, and let's quickly welcome David Miliband, President of the International Rescue Committee.
I got to report that David's Uber was late. So. It was the Uber in my legs was a bit late, so not your fault.
But just as we're discussing what's happening and what needs to happen, this is obviously a week here in New York, where a lot of global leaders are convening, where a lot of commitments are made, where a lot of lip service is paid to various crises. What are you hoping emerges from the discussions that are happening in the city on some of the vital issues that need to be addressed?
Well, you mentioned at the top, Ishaan, we have record numbers of displaced around the globe currently. I don't think you can go to one region of the world that isn't now impacted, either by violence, conflict, or drought, or other reasons that people would move. And we're hoping that strong political commitment will be there to find solutions, to find ways to build and maintain strong support, both on the political side, because obviously humanitarian aid is a Band-Aid. This is a short-term effort. What we really need are political solutions so people can go back safely, in dignity, being well supported. And absent that, we've got to find solutions so that we can support the host countries that have been receiving them now for decades, but also those individuals to be able to rebuild their lives, even if it's in a place of exile. So I think, a place like here at the General Assembly, New York, this is the place for those political solutions to happen if people can come together and find them.
Talking about other types of political solutions, Dara, I promise I'll get to you, but David, an email landed in my inbox earlier today from the IRC, essentially denouncing the Biden administration's actions on the border involving these Haitian asylum seekers. Could you speak to what's happening right now in the crisis? What is your view on the administration's use of Title 42 to deport many of these Haitians? And more broadly, how do you see the issue that the U.S. that's become a major political talking point here in the United States?
Well, because we're not a political organization, we're a humanitarian organization that speaks to what we see and what we know, we have to speak without fear or favor about the policies that exist around the world. And we were heavily critical of the Trump administration, and when they did things that we thought were wrong. And we don't support the use of Title 42 on the southern border. We don't think that's a solution to the so-called quote-unquote crisis, although if you're Bangladesh, which has 1 million people from Myanmar arriving, if you're Pakistan hosting 2.5 million Afghan refugees, if you're Jordan with 650,000 register refugees, you'd ask a big question about whether 10,000, 20,000 or 30,000 people arriving in the richest country in the world constitutes a quote-unquote crisis. So our view is very straightforward. There are international legal obligations, never mind moral obligations, to people who are fleeing. Those obligations include the necessity of treating every individual as an individual and processing their case in an appropriate way. America's a great country, but it takes Germany 8 to 10 weeks to process an asylum claim, and it takes America 3 to 4 years to process an asylum claim. It's got to be right that one of the richest countries in the world can process asylum claims in a way that is efficient and humane. Now, to be fair to the Biden administration, they inherited a very difficult set of circumstances from the previous administration. But we think it's really important that these global problems, whether it be health security, whether it be climate security, whether it be refugees, they're not going to get better if we walk away from those problems. You have to march towards the problems and address them. And the biggest challenge I feel I've got as the leader of a humanitarian organization, International Rescue Committee, is to persuade people that the refugee crisis is manageable, not unmanageable. Mm-hmm. And it certainly won't be manageable if we walk away from it. It's only manageable if it gets properly gripped. Government can't do that on its own. It needs civil society, it needs the private sector. Mm-hmm. But we live in a world that is more connected than ever before, and the danger is that we reach for solutions that are more disconnected than ever. And so I hope that this week, just to segue to Kelly's points, which I agree with entirely, every humanitarian crisis or every humanitarian emergency is also a political emergency. It wouldn't have emerged otherwise. Afghanistan is a political emergency and a humanitarian emergency. And obviously I've got a great fear that Ethiopia gets forgotten, that Somalia gets forgotten, that Syria gets forgotten. But if we don't, as a world, whatever sector we're in, public sector, private sector, voluntary sector, charitable sector, if we don't march towards those problems and bring our assets to address them, the problem's going to get worse and we'll all suffer. And I think that's the big, our theme of the week, sorry, I'm not going to take the next 17 minutes and 20 seconds in this one answer. Our theme of the week is no excuse for inaction. Last year there was an excuse at the UN General Assembly that it was COVID, no one was here, it was all new. We've got no excuses now, whether it be on health security, climate, and the administration is really stepping up in the COVID summit today. But whatever the issue, there's no excuses now for pretending that we don't realize the dangers of inaction.
So to talk about the private sector then, Dara, when I open my Uber app, I see this button that immediately points me to donating to Afghan refugees, donating rides, other forms of help as well. Could you talk a bit, and obviously you're somebody also, correct me if I'm wrong, who comes from a background of political asylum. Could you talk a bit about the decision to support refugees the way Uber is, and how broad and sustained is this commitment going to be?
Sure, absolutely. And first of all, I would say that it starts with organizations like the UN or the IRC, and the impact that they can have is enormous compared to any one company. But that shouldn't stop any one company from taking action. And I think from our standpoint, we get involved in areas that we think are particularly relevant to Uber. We have an enormous percentage of our drivers who are immigrants in this country, who are immigrants in Europe, et cetera. And also for me personally, I came to the US in 1978, by no means in the difficult situation that so many Afghani refugees are coming in. I was lucky enough to have an Uncle Nasrallah who lived in the US, and we were able to come here and we were able to stay at his house. But the opportunity that I had during a very, very politically difficult time, and the welcome that this country offered me has really inspired me to lean in here, but more so it was the passion of the Uber employees. So we asked ourselves, what can we do? And actually we spoke with David's team, what is it that we can do? And the answer became obvious, which is for refugees that we're bringing into the US and taking care of, thanks to, I think, the push of a lot of military, et cetera. The obvious answer was providing food and transportation for refugees who are landing here to give them an easy landing, or as easy a landing as possible. So we pitched in with $1 million of help in terms of food and transportation. But we also wanted to drive awareness amongst our user base. And so in the Uber app, we created the opportunity for Uber riders to donate to Afghan refugees. Honestly, didn't know what to expect. But 100,000 riders already have donated to the cause. That number is still ticking up, so we put another $1 million coming from our ridership. We match that as well, and again, it is in terms of food and transportation where we can really help out. And I think now what we're turning to is, listen, the money helps and the food and transportation helps, so we're gonna keep leaning in there. But it's really how do we engage our user base to talk about this problem, to help and to make it real for Americans who are so lucky to be in this country, and to just help out to refugees and or immigrants who are lucky enough to land here.
So do you see this kind of engagement extending beyond, say, these coming months and beyond the question of Afghan refugees to something more wider reaching?
I think, you have to start someplace, right? Sometimes if you try to take a universal problem, you won't know where to start. So from our standpoint, we said, let's take this issue on, and let's take the immediate issue, which is food, transportation, et cetera. What are the next issues that we can take on? And from our standpoint, one of the most significant issues of anyone coming into a new society and fitting into a new society is actually now we're thinking about earning. And how do you come into society? How do you land? How do you start earning for your family in a flexible way if you're taking care of your family? So actually the next steps, and we'll see what happens here that we're taking on, is we're translating our driver app into Pashtun and Dari. We now have local speakers in Pashtun and Dari, again, if you need customer service help, so sometimes signing up for the app and earning can be difficult, but we're going to create a smooth path for refugees when they're ready, if they want to land in and start earning US dollars, et cetera, to start earning and start being a productive part of society, and start to build the kind of life that I got to build here. And that's the best we can do. If we can learn from that and expand our learnings into other areas, we'll certainly do so. I've told my team, let's help the Afghani refugees right now. Let's do as much as we can right now. Let's take those learnings and expand them from there.
So one more question on this front, and I'd love to pivot then to our lovely panel here, but is there a business case for this? I mean, I think at the risk of overgeneralizing, a huge demographic, a huge constituency of people who use Uber are urban millennials, many of whom have a particular political view of things, and would support a decision, the kind of engagement that Uber is pursuing. They would support, say, what your rival Lyft is doing by promising to pay for the legal fees of drivers in Texas who may fall afoul of the new abortion law. Is there an incentive for you to take these kind of political stands? And I guess the flip side of that question is, there are critics who will say that what you're doing is a kind of woke capitalism, to use a pejorative term. It's a kind of PR exercise that perhaps distracts or obscures from other questions people may have about what Uber represents in terms of labor rights for casualized workers in the gig economy. How would you respond to that?
So there may theoretically be a business case, but we've never written a business case. So it's just not what it's about. There's a spirit at the company, and it is, we don't want to be a part of woke capitalism, et cetera. We want to engage in areas where we should engage. So for example, we are supporting drivers in Texas as well, just like Lyft, because it's the right thing to do. And again, coming back to the refugee crisis, such a large percentage of the Uber driver base are immigrants. This is an area where we should have a point of view. We do have a point of view. There is a special interest in it personally, and I'll cop to that. But there's also real interest in it in terms of the Uber employees. If there's an audience that's important to me, it's our drivers first, and then it's Uber employees. And so the actions that we're taking, one, are the right thing to do, but also very much match the view of our drivers or employees. And is that a business case? Sure. But it's also the right thing to do, which is more important.
Can I add on to
Sure,
that?
sure.
Because I think your experience, Dara, is very much what I'm sure David at IRC and us at the UN Refugee Agency see. There are multiple pieces to this. One is doing the right thing. Second, their customers, their suppliers, their employees. So it's good for business. And third, it is a way to get people back up on their feet.
Yeah.
And so I think, I'm just thinking about the opportunity that's coming up. We just saw this big announcement this week about the administration wanting to get to 125,000 refugees in this country through the resettlement program. That kind of linkage where you can make a practical, concrete difference, but it's also good for the business.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a first step, but you want these refugees to get integrated into society in a constructive way.
I mean, I was going to turn to you, David. Kelly mentioned the Biden administration raising the cap to 125,000. When it comes to, IRC is involved in dozens of countries, but when it comes to solutions to the issues that you're trying to tackle and the various conflicts that you're trying to help mitigate and provide a degree of humanitarian relief, how important is an American administration that shows a certain degree of leadership and accountability?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's very important. I mean, where America goes low, others follow, and when America goes high, some others follow. And so it's better to go high than to go low. Look, we're an unusual NGO in that we're in 30 to 40 countries that are either at war or conflict or are hosting the refugees from war or conflict. We're not in 120 countries. We're not an anti-poverty agency. We're focused on people whose lives are shattered by conflict, persecution, and disaster. And so Afghanistan is in microcosm. It encompasses the whole arc of crisis. It's got conflict, it's got internal displacement, and it's exporting people who end up in Pakistan or end up in the US. It's really important to say that most refugees are not in rich countries, they're in poor countries. 85-90% of the world's refugees are in the Bangladeshis of this world, the Lebanons of this world, the Ugandas of this world. But for those that come to the richer parts of the world, it's imperative that the right example is set. And actually, America has been good at refugee resettlement. It's traditionally done half of the world's organized transfer of people on refugee resettlement. We're actually the largest refugee resettlement agency in the US now with 25 offices here. We've got 1,700 staff in Afghanistan, so we do cover the whole arc. But we saw in 2015 the Obama administration raised its cap to 90,000, other countries followed. When the Trump administration lowered the cap to 15,000, other countries went down. So America really matters. It matters in a second way, which is that the policies of integration that are piloted here can go elsewhere. We've taken American experience of refugee integration to our offices in Germany, where 1.5 million Syrians arrived in 2015-16. And in schools and in the labor market, we're showing how to take the lessons of 40 years of refugee resettlement in America and apply it there. So there's a second way. There's just a final point I'd make. I agree with what Kelly said about the way in which we can mobilize. But there's one other point. I had this really important experience for me. At the height of the Trump administration, I went to Silicon Valley and I spoke at I think it was a Microsoft event actually. And a woman came up to me afterwards in floods of tears. And I said, what's wrong? She said, look, my parents were Vietnamese refugees in the 1980s. They never talked about it. And we've brewed a backlash against refugees because we've not actually told our own story. And she said, I vow to you, I'm going to tell my story, or the story of my family. And I think that is a really important point, that today 75% of Americans say that they think the country should do the right thing by Afghans. But there are others, and there's a generic case that needs to be made. And the best way to make it is not men in suits, it's the refugees themselves. Dara, in a modest way, he said, he was a lucky refugee, but it's important, your story, because people think, well, it could be me. And so whether you're a fitness trainer from Kabul, whether you're a farmer from Congo, whether you're a translator, we need those stories out there so that those of us lucky enough to live in rich countries can see, well, there, but for the grace of God go I.
Kelly, you have been in your role as Deputy Commissioner for Refugees for more than half a decade, a period of time that's seen So the intensification of various crises, the explosion of new ones from Myanmar to Syria and elsewhere. Try to share with us perhaps what has been your single greatest frustration in managing some of these crises, and perhaps what is your single greatest source of hope as you kind of, take on the challenges that are there.
So coming back to the way we started this conversation with regard to Afghanistan, not a new situation, not a new crisis, not a new emergency. I mean, this is protracted. We now have an opportunity in terms of turning the spotlight back on. My frustration is often we have little snippets of attention on Venezuela, on Syria, on Myanmar, but then it's whatever is the hot topic of the moment, and then the world turns away. And so the frustration is we need that kind of sustained effort, both in terms of response, but also when things don't work, what are we going to do next in terms of those solutions? I would say, though, in terms of the hope and what does give us hope, frankly, it's Dara's story. It's what the whole of society, private sector, international organizations, governments, and then the refugees themselves, the voices at the middle of all of this, that they are doing for themselves what, we can only aid, we can only support, we cannot replace. And I think what we've seen over the last several years is a much stronger voice from the displaced, and that can only continue and can only grow, because otherwise it really doesn't make the difference it needs to.
Dara, to turn to you, and of course, the legacy that you bring in your personal life as well, but also as CEO of one of the world's most important companies, and a company that has a global capacity and reach that many organizations, many governments perhaps do not. How do you see Uber's role going forward, especially as not just in terms of refugees, but as the world kind of grapples with climate change, with the wages of the pandemic, when there are all these global problems that have no borders? What does a company like Uber, where does it fit in to that sort of situation?
Well, I think that we can lead by doing our part in the areas where we can have the greatest impact. And you asked a big question to answer in a minute, but I'll try, which is, for example, as it relates to sustainability, we have made a commitment by 2030 to be all electric, essentially, in the US, Europe, and the developed world. And that will require lots of efforts, et cetera, but that is how we can play our part in sustainability. And if the biggest company in the transportation space makes that kind of a commitment, it's going to create the catalyst for other companies to follow. So I think we go through safety, we look at sustainability, we look at immigration as well, and the refugee crisis, and we try to do our part. But I think in the end, the most important part of this are the individual stories, right? And we have, for example, a driver, Mr. Assad, who is an Afghani, and he had some trouble getting his family out of Afghanistan. We had some military vets help the family get through Kabul airport, come over here, and we had a team actually now furnish their home with all sorts of stuff, and like teddy bears and sheets and everything, so that his family can come to what feels like a home. We didn't do it for some theoretical basis. We did it for Mr. Assad. He helped us, and it's our job to help him back.
Thank you. David, we have very little time, but I'd love to close the panel with you. If you could wave a wand and come back this time next year to this summit, what's a conversation on refugees, on the political challenges that we face, that you hope not to be having this time next year?
I think that the biggest conversation that I don't want to have is with rich countries about whether or not they need to step up. The conversation I really want to have is how we get to grips with the roots of the refugee crisis, which today are a mixture of conflict, climate change, and religious/ethnic division. It's political failure. And I used to be a diplomat, as you know, in the UK government, and the tools of diplomacy for resolving conflicts between states are not adequate for resolving conflicts within states. And Syria, South Sudan, Afghanistan, these are conflicts within states. And the conversation we need to have is about how to adapt the tools of diplomacy to create political structures within states that can forge compromise and that can avoid the conflicts that are driving the 82 million people who've been displaced from their homes by violence internally and externally. And if we do that, we'll actually be getting to grips with my greatest frustration, which is that we're dealing with the symptoms of the problem, not dealing with the roots of the problem. And that's what the UN General Assembly should be about.
Well, hopefully we can have that conversation next year this time. And thank you all for joining. Thank you to this remarkable panel. And thank you all for tuning in online. My name is Ishaan Tharoor, and it's been a pleasure hosting you.